Well, we are starting a new series in this season of Advent today as we anticipate the birth of Jesus. And this series is called Locating Joy. I wonder how you have gone locating joy this year. For many, it has been a real challenge. But Christmas is classically a time of joy, and we want to explore what it means to locate joy in places that we might not think it's possible. So over the next few weeks, we'll be looking at locating joy in fear, in longing, in mourning, and in unexpected places. Because the reality is, as we see in Matthew's account of Jesus' birth, that Jesus was born into a time of significant turmoil. He's born into a world of chaos. You'd think that the coming of Jesus should bring order and peace, but as we'll see in these chapters in Matthew, the coming of Jesus actually turns out to bring about disaster, where Herod enacts a genocide, killing all boys under 2 years and under, and God's Son, who's promised to be the one to set his people free, is taken out of Israel back into the land of Egypt, which in the Jewish mind represented slavery and the opposite of the purposes of God, before Jesus and his family end up in this backwater town called Nazareth. What does it mean for the joy of all mankind to be born into such chaos and uncertainty? Is joy something that we only find in good times, or is it something that can be experienced despite circumstance? And if it can be experienced despite circumstances, how does this happen? Do we just wait for it to come, or are there ways for us to cultivate and locate it wherever we are? In today's passage, we see the birth of Jesus from the perspective of Joseph. If you want to see Mary's perspective, you can read Luke's account. And today I want to spend a little time looking at Joseph's response to what is happening here. Because we see that in the midst of this moment of great joy, Joseph experiences something that many of us experience often, and has been felt by some of us particularly acutely this year. That experience is fear. We've got lots of names for this experience in our language because it's so common, and could include anything from doubt, worry and nervousness, to anxiety and panic, to horror or terror or dread or desperation. These are all expressions of fear to differing degrees. If you've experienced any of these in this strange year, then you're not the only one. But this is no comfort in the midst of it. The question is, what do we do with these feelings? We know it's not nice to feel them, but is it okay to feel them? Does feeling them say something about our level of faith or lack thereof? Should we avoid them or embrace them, or something in between? What do we do with these feelings? I want to have a look at this passage to see the fear that Joseph experiences and how he navigates it, and what insight this experience could give us into our own encounters with fear. The first 17 verses of Matthew's Gospel outline the family line of Jesus from Abraham through to King David and down to this man named Joseph and his wife Mary. And then verse 18 reads, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit." In order to understand what's happening here, it's helpful to know how marriage worked in these times. Because a girl would generally be betrothed to a husband from the age of about 12. And at that time, she would go to live with her husband for anywhere between a few months and a year before they are officially married. In this time, it was a cultural norm for the husband and wife to sleep together, because if the wife fell pregnant, then the child would have a secure home to grow up in. Some read this passage thinking the problem that Joseph comes to face is that Mary has had sex before she's officially married. But the issue here is not that Mary is pregnant. The issue is that Joseph knows he's not the father because he has not slept with her. The problem is that presumably, Mary had slept with another man. She committed adultery. And at learning of his betrothed wife's unfaithfulness, we're told her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly. We're told two things about Joseph here. He's a just man, and two, he's unwilling to put Mary to shame. Joseph doesn't have the information yet that Mary is with child from the Holy Spirit, or at least he hasn't found Mary's explanation satisfactory if she's told him that. So he's left with a conundrum here, and he needs to work out what he's going to do. It doesn't even seem an option for him in Matthew's account of this story to stay with Mary and to go through with the official marriage. We're not told why, but presumably and understandably because of the hurt of the betrayal that he's currently experiencing. But the problem is that if he divorces Mary because of her unfaithfulness to him, this will open her up to public shame. But he's a righteous man, a just man, we're told, and just because she's hurt him, he doesn't want to use this against her. He actually cares for her well-being. And so he's wrestling against this shame that he will impose on her by sending her away. Unless, he reasons, he can divorce her quietly, as a no-fault divorce, rather than because of her unfaithfulness, so that she can be returned to her father and potentially be married off quickly to someone else. And we're told that Joseph is thinking through what to do when something unexpected happens. But as he considered these things, as he wrestled with what was the best course of action to take, behold, look, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will bear a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Can you imagine having this dream and waking up and the head spin you'd have? When you went to bed, your wife was carrying someone else's child and you were hurt and angry and in turmoil about what to do. And you woke up with this different perspective on the assumptions that you'd make. Notice what the angel of the Lord does here is he provides the information to Joseph about whose child this is. What he does is he preempts Joseph's emotional response to this information. He says, do not fear to take Mary as your wife. Fear is this emotion that makes decisions for many people. We do things because of fear, and we stop doing things because of fear. We can imagine some of the fears that Joseph may have wrestled with here. Fear to marry Mary because of her assumed unfaithfulness, but a fear to divorce her because of the shame it would inflict. And now the fear of marrying her as a result of a dream he'd had about this being God's child. Alasdair Groves, in his book Untangling Emotions, suggests that emotions that we experience actually highlight for us the things that we love. And I think this is a good way to think about this. So fear, as an emotion, is an indicator in our body that something that we care deeply about is at risk. Think about your experience of fear in this way. In what situations do you feel nervous or worried or anxious or overwhelmed? And what do those situations reveal about what you care about? If you feel nervous when your child is not home when they said they would be home, that fear reveals that you care about them and their well-being. If you feel nervous about the impending birth of your child, that's reasonable because you know that the process will be painful, and the anxiety shows that you care about your well-being and the life of this child. But it's often not as simple as this, of course, because you may be anxious about giving a presentation at work or school. And that may reveal things that you love that are either good or bad or a mixture of both. Because Maybe this anxiety shows that you care about doing a good job, or doing as well as you can, or presenting true and right and helpful information to your audience, which is good. But it might also reveal that you care too much about what other people think of you based on this presentation, or it might reveal that you base your sense of worth on doing a better presentation than others. So fear can be an expression of affection and right concern, or it can be an expression of a disordered desire, something you obviously care about, but maybe something you care about more than you should. Is it right for Joseph to wrestle with fear in this situation? I'd say a resounding yes. It's a good thing that he's afraid to marry Mary when she's carrying someone else's child, because he's not sure he can trust her, and it shows that faithfulness in marriage is an important thing to him. Is it right that he's afraid to send her away? Of course it is. If he sends her away, she'll be shamed. This shows that he has genuine concern for her. So the question I come to as we think about this is, if fear is showing me that what I care about is at risk, how do I best engage with fear in a way that enables me to locate joy even in the midst of it? I think it starts by looking at what's driving my fear. What's driving this fear response? And so I'd ask something like, what is it that I'm afraid of? Sometimes easier asked than worked out. Sometimes identifying the thing we're afraid of is really hard for a number of reasons. For some, we don't know what we're afraid of because we don't know we're afraid. We're not very aware of our emotions. And in this case, it could be good to ask someone close what they see, or to sit in the Psalms and to see the way the psalmist expresses emotion and learn from them. A lack of emotional awareness doesn't mean you're not afraid. It just means you don't know you're afraid. And sitting with someone to help identify what's going on might help. Some of us are kept from identifying what we're afraid of because we have this idea that being afraid must mean I'm not trusting God. So I ignore the fear and I go on in faith. It's the Christian stoic. This person might hear the angel say to Joseph, "Do not fear to take Mary as your wife," as stop fearing and just do the right thing. When God says, "do not fear" throughout the Bible, they interpret this as it's wrong to fear. Fear is the opposite of faith. Fear is an expression of not trusting God, which of course it can be at times. But when God says, "don't be afraid," he's not saying it's wrong to fear. He's saying you don't need to fear. When the angel says, "do not fear to take Mary as your wife," he's saying it's natural that you'd be afraid. This would be a normal response in the situation. But don't let that fear make your decision for you and stop you from taking Mary as your wife. If you think it's wrong to fear because God has not given you the spirit of fear, then that might keep you from seeing what you're afraid of. And then for some, we can't see what we're afraid of because we avoid these emotions at all costs. And so we can't even face the question of what I'm afraid of, because if I do, I'll feel the fear. I don't want to feel the fear. This seems to be our culture's main approach to fear, because our culture encourages us to live for the experience of positive feelings and the avoidance of negative ones. And it says, how I feel becomes my most important pursuit. The thing that defines the quality of my existence is whether or not I am happy. And so when I experience negative emotions like fear, worry or anxiety, I'm led to believe there must be something wrong with me. And I need to avoid that feeling in order to feel good, or fix the feeling so I don't have it anymore. Instead of looking at the fear and working out what I'm responding to, I distract myself with other things that will make me feel good, using things as an escape from how I feel to fix those feelings through alcohol or shopping or our phones or gaming or sex or TV or food or work or whatever is our self-prescribed drug of choice. It's no wonder then if avoidance of negative emotions and pursuit of positive ones are our central cultural values, that levels of addiction and mental health issues are so high in our society. Some of us can't name our fears because we're unwilling to sit in them and examine them. My experience, though, is that by facing and naming what I'm afraid of actually breaks some of the power of that fear. So what do you need to do in order to identify what you're afraid of? Well, after you've begun to identify your fear, secondly, you want to look at what this fear is showing you that you care about. And this usually isn't a simple answer. Look at Joseph. He cares about multiple things that seem to be in competition with one another. And so he's not sure what to do. On the one hand, he cares about his future marriage, so he doesn't want to be with someone who cheats on him before they've even officially been married. But he also cares about Mary, and he doesn't want to bring her shame. And in all this, he cares about making a wise and God-honoring decision. For us too, there'll be multiple things that the fear is revealing about what I care about. And it's important to be able to, as honestly as possible, name those things that fear shows as important to me without judging myself for caring about it. It is what holds us back here is self-righteousness at times, trying to make ourselves look better than we actually are, even to ourselves. It keeps us from being honest about what is really behind my fear. But what we're trying to do as we engage and examine what is sitting beneath the fear is to discern whether this is something that is good for me to love to the degree to which I'm afraid, or if the extent of my fear shows that this love has become disordered in some way. So once I've identified what I'm afraid of and what this fear reveals about what's important to me, I bring this to God and I ask, how do I respond in worship in the midst of this fear? If fears in our bodies are signals that something we love is potentially under threat, then this should drive us to dependence on God. What does that look like? Well, usually it just looks like including Him in it and acting on what we come to see. Simply tell Him about it and show Him what I'm noticing and responding to what He's showing me. Sometimes it's a prayer that says, Father, I'm afraid of what I'm going to face. Help me know you're with me. Sometimes it's a prayer that says, Father, I've realized I care too much about what people think about me. Help me to keep that care in proportion. Sometimes it's simply doing what I know I need to do. Presumably what Joseph does after waking up to realize that this dream where God tells him that this child is of the Holy Spirit, the dream confirms what Mary has told him all along, that she didn't cheat on him, and that this is God's work in her life. And so what Joseph does then is worship. He accepts that his fears to stay with Mary, which wasn't even an option for him before, were misguided fears. And even if he still feels hesitant, he responds in worship. You might not have noticed Joseph's worship in the passage because Joseph's act of worship is the most straightforward kind. It's simple obedience. When Joseph woke from sleep, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded him. He took his wife, but knew her not until she had given birth to a son. And he called his name Jesus. Jesus is born into a world of fear. And as we'll see in the next few weeks, this fear doesn't end once he's born. In fact, it gets worse. And as you may have discovered in an acute way this year, it's still our natural and God-given response when we perceive something we love to be under threat. There's one primary reason God provides when he says, do not fear to people, which is also a primary reason Matthew is telling us about this episode. All this took place to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. When God says, do not fear, the reason he gives for not needing to fear is his presence. When we get the right view of who God is and learn to know his presence with us, we do not need to fear. The thing that enables us to experience joy in the midst of fear is the presence of love. And this is what we remind ourselves that this story is about. It's the story of the presence of love making himself more accessible to us, continuing his work in all circumstances, even in the midst of fear. And so over the next 4 weeks, I hope you'll join us as we explore what it means to locate joy in places like this, where Joseph and Mary were, and where we are right now. Places that may be unchosen and uninvited even, but still places where God continues his work and wants to make his presence